I am a theater historian, also what's called a dramaturg, which is sort of a literary consultant to plays in production. I was invited by Professor Gordon to suggest some possible titles for a play to discuss in the context of what I think is, based on the syllabus anyway, a really interesting class. I pitched him a few different things, and Top Dog Underdog was ultimately what we agreed to discuss. I was looking over the sort of learning outcome topics on the syllabus, and so this will be largely a discussion of how this particular play by Susan Laurie Parks represents family issues, how it uses a particular approach to dialogue to illuminate certain aspects of the African American experience, etc. And it's also just a really interesting play about two men written by a woman, which is another reason that I wanted to look at it. I'm going to ask you, I'm glad you guys all have a copy of the script with you, I'm going to ask you to do a fair amount of reading aloud in the class. I realize that it might be a little different than when I ask my acting students or my theater students to do a little reading. I also noticed that all of the students in the room are women, so we're going to have to kind of bracket our concerns about being cast cross-gender, cross-race, cross-whatever, and just read the play as we can manage to read the play. It's really the only way to, I think, effectively teach a play is to work from the text out loud. And so we'll all just get a special dispensation right up front that none of us in the room match up totally with Lincoln and Booth or Booth in a way that none of us would probably be cast in those roles if we were performing the play. We'll just acknowledge that at the outset and move into the discussion. Okay, the first thing I want to talk about is I sent around a handout at the outset of the class, and the first page of the handout, everybody have that? Andrew, did you get a copy?
Yes.
Okay. The first thing that we've got is a passage from an essay that Susan Laurie Parks wrote, actually discussing an earlier play of hers, which lays out some of her attitudes and understanding about what a play is, what a play does, what it's for. Okay? This is actually a fairly common thing for playwrights. One of the things that playwrights will do is not only will they write a play about whatever they're interested in writing a play about, they will also often, if they are a sophisticated artist, and I think Ms. Parks qualifies as a sophisticated artist, they will also lay out a kind of what we might call a poetics for what they're doing. A poetics is simply a term for how they are going to go about writing dramatic poetry, is what the Greeks would have called it, but how they're going to go about writing drama. Okay? So what I've got in the handout are a few bracketed passages that I'd like for us to read aloud. By the way, I'm sorry for the blurriness of the handout. Is it still legible? We had a little copier issue in our office over in theater today. It's still legible? Okay. Now that you've said it's legible, I'm going to ask somebody to volunteer to read some of it. So somebody who's brave and wants to start reading, stick up your hand. Thank you. Thank you, the ringer I brought in the room. Okay, so we're going to go from the first page. There's a little bracket and a little arrow next to it, which starts with a play is a blueprint of an event. Okay, so we'll start just by reading that aloud.
Okay. A play is a blueprint of an event, a way of creating and rewriting history through the medium of literature. Since history is a recorded or remembered event, theater, for me, is the perfect place to make history. That is, because so much of African American history has been unrecorded, dismembered, washed out, one of my tasks as a playwright is to, through literature and the special strange relationship between theater and real life, locate the ancestral burial ground, dig for bones, find bones, hear the bones sing, write it down. The bonus tells us what was, the bones tell us what was, is, will be, and because their song is a play, something that through a production actually happens, I'm working theater like an incubator to create new historical events. I'm remembering and staging historical events which through their happening on stage are ripe for inclusion in the canon of history. Theater is an incubator for the creation of historical events and, as in the case of artificial insemination, the baby is no less human.
Okay, this is both a little bit dense and a little bit poetic. So we're going to take some time to sort of parse what she's saying, because wrapped up in what she's just said in these two short paragraphs is a really unusual idea. And it's going to take us a little while to work through this idea in order to start making sense of the play that she's written. Okay? So when she's talking about this idea, in particular in the second paragraph, because the song of the bones, as she says, in other words, the song of the past, the song of the oral tradition of African Americans, is a play, as it expresses itself through her, something that through a production actually happens. She, is working theater like an incubator to create, quote, new historical events. What do you make of that? Just not necessarily even a paraphrase of what she's saying, but just a response to that. What's she getting at? Please.
Historically, African American history hasn't been documented, really. So
Right.
most of it is translated through an oral tradition. So
Exactly.
theater really lends itself well for that.
Okay, we're up to that point. So we've sort of diagnosed an issue that she wants to get at, which is the continual erasure of an oral tradition.
Yeah.
How does it stick? How does it stay? How does it become history if it doesn't get written down, if there is not a set record of it? So here's her solution. Her solution is in this phrase, something that through a production, and she even includes italics, so we know that it's important, something that actually happens. Here's the really interesting idea in what she's saying. She is suggesting that, and this changes, I think, the way we think about plays generally. Normally we think about plays as something where a few people are on stage, and somebody has written this play so that I speak to you, you speak to me, but I'm speaking as someone else. And the person who responds to me is speaking as someone else. I'm Hamlet, you're Ophelia, back and forth, okay? And we don't really do what we say we do. Does that make sense? When I stab someone in Hamlet, they don't really die. We're faking, we're pretending, we're playing, okay? What she is suggesting is that the events that she is depicting actually happen. And let's take her seriously for a moment and see what we can make of that. If we have Lincoln and Booth, these two brothers, with these difficulties, on stage, we know that, and did anybody, just interject for a second, did anybody get a chance to see Top Dog Diaries, the movie that was on reserve? No? Okay. Anyway, we've got, in the original Broadway production, or the original New York production, should be clear, the original New York production, before it moved to Broadway, starred Don Cheadle as Booth and Jeffrey Wright as Lincoln, so a couple of actors that I'll reference. When it moved, Don Cheadle was to Broadway, Don Cheadle was replaced by Mos Def, but basically, anyway, we've got this consistent set of actors. Okay, so what she's saying is that Booth and Lincoln go through this kind of ritual every night that the play is put on stage. They say their lines, the lines have in a sense become their own lines. They engage in these repetitive actions of doing the play night after night. She calls it, in other terms, a pageant that they are putting on. And while on the one hand, what's happening is not happening, okay? The final gunshot doesn't actually kill a human being. Does that make sense? And that's what we usually think of when we think of a play. Okay? We're engaged in what the Greeks called mimesis, M-I-M-E-S-I-S, imitation or representation. Something is standing in for something else. Her key point, and the thing that makes this a really interesting way of writing plays, is what she's saying is that even though what they're doing is fiction, even though it is an imitation of real events, a representation of real events, the fact that two flesh and blood human beings are actually standing in front of other flesh and blood human beings, saying something and doing something, that part of it really does happen. Does that make sense? Give me a nod if that really makes sense. Okay. The fact that people actually exist in time and space to put the play on, to scream and sweat and move around and relate to each other and touch each other and refrain from touching each other and engage in all of these physical postures and verbal theatrics, all of that adds up to something being done. Does that make sense? It's a way of taking theater seriously that I have not encountered prior to her writing this about 12 years ago. The idea that in a tradition where much of what has been actually said and done in the world has disappeared, if we give credence to the idea that there are two people physically putting on, as again to use her terms, a pageant, something really happened. Every time this play has been performed, and I've worked with people who've worked on the play, in fact I was talking to our stage management professor today who said, you want to hear about 100 stories about all of the stuff that happened when we were doing this play in Kansas City about 10 years ago? I said I would love to hear them because it's, again, it's not just a fictional event. It is simultaneously, it's a hybrid of a fictional event and a real event. Because real time went into it, real human action, real human agency went into it. Real sweat and tears went into it. Okay? This is the thing that she reminds us of. This is the reason that she's interested in the idea of putting language in the mouths of actors that are going to say it over and over again. This idea of repetition also is going to become key for us today. Questions about that, comments about that, responses? They don't need to be well thought out. They can just be, that's cool, or I disagree with that, or that seems hard to get my head around, or anything.
That makes sense.
Okay, awesome. What about it makes sense?
I mean, I guess since you do put it in perspective that everybody, they are putting their work into it, their tears and their sweat.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know, I never thought of it in that way.
That it's an actual human event. And in the face of, like I say, as she says, the erasure, the continual erasure over centuries of so many actual human events in the African American experience, to mark that by using the means of drama to repeat, to make something stick, to make something stay, to make a ceremony, to make a pageant that we can do over and over again, is a very specific gesture of keeping a kind of dialogue alive. And the idea that it actually happens, again, going back to her italicized phrase, that's the key idea here, okay? While we do everything else that we're going to do today, while we talk about all the other topics we're going to talk about today, keep in mind this notion of, even though these are just words on a page, even though this is just a script that you bought and read alone at home, this has also been done many, many times with many, many pairs of men, with many directors, male and female, with many, many designers, etc. All of the people that take the tickets and sit and watch it and react physically in space to it. This is also something, metaphorically speaking, in a way, that has really happened. And it's really happened a lot of times. Okay, so that's a key idea. All right, cool. So, having said that, we can move on to the next thing in the reading that I handed out. So, go ahead and flip the page. And on the following page, you should have another little arrow flag and another bracketed passage. We're not going to read the upper bracket. I teach this play in a different class, and I teach it a little bit differently for a different class, so ignore those upper brackets. We're going to go with the one nearly at the bottom of page 8 that says repetition and revision. Everyone found that? Okay. A new volunteer to read from, thank you very much, repetition and revision.
Repetition and revision is a concept integral to jazz aesthetic, in which the composer or performer will write or play a musical phrase once and again, etc. With each revisit, the phrase is slightly revised, rep and rev, as I call it in its central element in my work. Though its use, I'm working to create a dramatic text that departs from the traditional linear narrative style, to look and sound more like a musical score.
Okay. So we've got the idea of connecting musical scores, the idea of notation, to the idea of writing a play. But what do you make of that? What's this idea of, in your own words, what's this idea of repetition and revision?
It's like the musical concept of variations on a theme.
Yes, okay, go into that a little more.
Well, for instance, if you were composing something, you would have kind of your basic melody, and you would keep revisiting it in different formats. I can't think of any good examples right now.
Yeah. This is the point that if we managed to get the thing working, I would have played a little bit of music, but I'll just hum you a few bars. Okay. I was going to play something by a guy named Roland Kirk, a jazz musician, and the basic melody goes ba ba bum 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 ba ba bum bum ba ba bum. And the opening of the song goes through that same passage multiple times. Ba-ba-bum-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-bum. Does it again and again, but changes it ever so subtly each time. We've got the idea of repetition. Repetition is easy. We know what it is to repeat something, to do it over and over and over again. Repetition with revision is a little more difficult, okay? It's the idea of revising every time you go through something for the added weight that it generates. This, I think, because I know a lot of you guys, or a lot of what the course is about is discussion, is about interviewing people and talking to people. One of the key points that I think I can bring out today is the idea that if something gets repeated, it's important. If somebody says something more than once, it's important. By the way, did you notice that I just did that? I said the same thing 2 different ways. Repetition with a slight revision. You know I must think that this is an important thing because I'm saying it multiple times and revising it so that if it didn't hit you straight on the first time, if you were maybe momentarily thinking about dinner, or if you were thinking about something else, I brought it back around and mentioned it again so that it would strike you slightly differently and maybe this time it would stick. This is how people communicate generally. This is why repetition and revision is aesthetically pleasing. This is why it lets us know somebody said, somebody's, in other words, reaching out to us and saying, you really need to hear me because I'm going to say it multiple times. I'm going to communicate it this way, but I'm also going to communicate it slightly differently in case you missed it, and slightly differently in case you missed it. These are the ways that human beings cue one another to when something is truly important. Okay? Does that make sense? Responses to that? If it rang a bell for you, did it ring a bell in your own life or in your own experience or in your own studies?
Well, it's like sometimes if you watch a movie, you could have seen that movie several times over, but you get something different from it each time.
Okay. Which is interesting because in that case, the movie's the same every time. The repetition is the same every time, but the revision happens inside yourself. What has happened is your circumstances have changed. You're a different version of yourself than you were the previous times that you've seen it. And so we can also have repetition and revision in ourselves as receivers of information. Something that we weren't ready to hear and now we are ready to hear it. Or something that we were ready to hear and now we're not. Okay. There's a second set of brackets. You did a lovely job reading. Do you want to go to the next bracket on the page below?
Repetition we accept?
Yes.
Okay. Repetition. We accept it in poetry and call it incremental refrain. For the most part, incremental refrain creates a weight and a rhythm. In dramatic writing, it does the same. Yes, but again, what about all those words over and over? We all want to get to the climax. Where does the repetition fit? First, it's not just repetition, but repetition with revision. And in drama change, revision is the thing. Characters refigure their words, and through a refiguring of language, show us that they are experiencing their situation anew. Secondly, a text based on the concept of repetition and revision is one which breaks from the text which we are told to write, the text which cleanly arcs. Thirdly, rep and rev texts create a real challenge for the actor and director, as they create a physical life appropriate to that text. In such plays, we are not moving from A to B, but rather, for example, from A to A to A to B to A. Through such movement, we refigure A, and if we continue to call this movement forward progression, which I think it is, then we refigure the idea of forward progression. And if we insist on calling writing structured with this in mind, plays, which I think they are, then we've got a different kind of dramatic literature.
Okay, thank you. That's a longish passage, so let's take it a piece at a time. So this bit about we accept it in poetry, we accept it in music, she's mentioned that above, but there's something about drama that makes us a little more resistant to this idea of repetition and revision. She says we all want to get to the climax, which is just another way of saying the turning point. The point of no return, the point when something is decided and we can't go back, the point where something is done that can't be undone. But there's also, she's pointing out, another way of creating meaning, creating emphasis, creating a kind of forward progression in drama that doesn't depend on just drastically changing the situation. There's a key sentence here. Characters refigure their words, and through a refiguring of language, show us that they are experiencing their situation anew. What do you make of that? How is that like life? By the way, this doesn't, I realize this is more an anthropology class than a drama class, and I'm just a guest. So how is that true of life?
There's a concept that, I don't remember what it's called, but kind of the idea that you see a purple car, and then the next day you see another purple car. And it's not because, you know, you're seeing something all of a sudden, but because it kind of gets into your head, and then when you see it again, you notice it, and you're like, oh, it's a coincidence, and it builds, and like the...
Right, and it starts to be, I mean, human beings naturally look for patterns. That's one of the things that we tend to do, is assemble things in patterns that generate meaning. So the movement forward in this whole really interesting, not necessarily A to B, but A to A to A to A to A to B to A, can partly be the interest that we see from recognizing a pattern. Recognizing that this set of behaviors is going to happen over and over and over, and it's going to mean more, and it's going to mean differently because of its repetition. We all know people who make the same mistake over and over and over again in their life, correct? One way of looking at, and then they try and make a change, but they end up back in the same place. That's A to A to A to B to A, only in a different context. She's simply creating a way of illustrating how you might write a play about that. Lincoln and Booth in the play, and we will get to Lincoln and Booth in the play in a little while. Lincoln and Booth essentially make the same mistakes over and over and over through their life. As we will discuss, they are still working out the fact that their parents abandoned them. This is a play, among other things, about two brothers who were abandoned by their family, and their attempt to make a new family of just the two of them, and their repeated failure to make it work. The fact that they fail again and fail differently, but it's all the same gesture. Okay? Does that make sense? Okay. Another key element of this is on the next page, top of the next page. Just to reiterate, and if we continue to call this movement forward progression, in other words, if we continue to think of there being, and this is the interesting thing, because she's asking us to do something non-intuitive. She's asking us to think of progress in a different way. We usually think of progress as A to B, to C, to D, to E. We progress through changing. What if we thought about progress as returning to the same thing over and over again, but having it mean something different? Does that make sense? It's actually not a bad way to think about living. I come to the same job every day. I teach the same classes all the time. But there is, in order for me to get through life and not be a miserable person, there has to be a sense of progress in that. To revisit the same situation, but to revisit it differently. Does that make sense? So again, she's asking us to call it forward progression. And if we continue to call this movement forward progression, which I think it is, then we refigure the idea of forward progression. What is it to make progress? What is it to get better? She's asking us to revise our sense that things have necessarily to be different, situationally, completely, to be actually different, to feel different, to feel like progress. Does that seem like sophistry, or does that seem sensible to you? Am I just being too clever by half? Maybe I am. Maybe this is a big prank. Or maybe I'm telling you something true. What do you think? Yeah?
I think it makes sense, because, like, I don't know, everything that's been said, I kind of relate it to what we're talking about.
Oh, I would love for you to relate it to what you're talking about in the class. So take a second and let's hear that.
Alright, well, like, whenever you hear someone's illness story, like, it's, what if their forward progression, their ideal forward progression in terms of, like, societal context would be to get better.
Yes.
But sometimes it's impossible, you know,
Right.
depending on what's wrong with them. And sometimes, like, the changes that they make only benefit their view of it and their perception of it. It doesn't change the fact that they're still going through the same medical process.
Yes.
So I think, like, with that, their forward progression can't be from A to B sometimes.
Yes.
It can only be from A to A. And you can think that you're going A to B and to go through A to get to B, which would be like to be cured, but sometimes that's not possible. So,
Yeah.
but I think like with some chronic illnesses, you can't really make anything better. You just have to change the perception of it. And in that sense, you're bettering yourself because you learn how to deal with it and how to make it not miserable. Like if you were to go to the same job every day.
Yeah, yeah.
So that's it. It makes sense.
Does that agree with the rest of you? Okay. Anybody want to add anything? My goal is to hear something out of everybody in the room, by the way, before I wrap up today. No pressure. Okay. Excellent. So we have this idea on the table of repetition and revision. So let's move into our discussion of the play. You can either leave the handout on your desk or put it away. We're done with it. So in the play, what's an example of repetition and revision? What is something that is done multiple times in the play, but it is done differently, or it is done in a way that it means something different as it's repeated?
Booth is constantly doing the hustling of the cards.
Yes.
Okay, okay. Throwing the cards, as they say. You know, the 3-card Monte game. The 3-card Monte game is done for practice. The 3-card Monte game is done later in the play as an attempt at bonding. The 3-card Monte game is done finally as a kind of combat between two male animals. Okay? That's, by the way, the phrasing that Susan Lawyer Parks herself uses, is that by the end of the play, what you're dealing with are two people that are different than the Lincoln and Booth that we've kind of come to know and like for much of the play. By the end, when they're playing it seriously, when they're playing for keeps, she calls them male animals at that point, and I certainly don't take offense at that. So, we've got this idea of this really interesting thing of repetition and revision throughout the play. A sort of refrain or a kind of motif. I'm going to use a lot of musical phrases. Kind of a motif that we return to multiple times to see the same thing done but mean something different because the context has changed. Because something inside the person doing the action has changed, even if the outside action is the same. Okay? This is a very intuitive play. This is a woman who knows human nature. This is a woman who is a keen observer of things and has captured something, which is, again, this idea that we can return to the same basic activities, but have them be fundamentally miles apart every time we return to them. It's something to look for in people's behavior. Okay. So, a little bit about the 3-card Monte game. Susan Lawyer Parks didn't know anything about 3-card Monte until she met a man named Paul Osher. It's the man, if you read the dedication at the first page of the play, that's the man to whom the play is dedicated. Paul Osher is a blues musician. I don't know if anybody knows blues musicians, but there's a guy named Muddy Waters who passed away in the 1980s, but in the sort of pre- and post-World War II era. He grew up in Mississippi, essentially on a sharecropping, as a sharecropping farmer. Moved to Chicago and was key in the development of especially electric blues music. So Paul Osher was one of the guys in his band. And the two of them met, the two of them fell in love, they became engaged, and while she was starting to think about her new play, the two of them went to New Orleans, and they were watching people in New Orleans. Have anybody been to New Orleans? Yeah. Please, if you haven't, oh my God, go! It's that's one of the reasons that I was so glad to move from Minnesota down here. Is it was a drive to get to New Orleans instead of a flight. So anyway, they're on the street and they're watching a guy do the 3-card Monte game, and she's just mesmerized by the dexterity of it and the artistry of it. And suddenly she hears a man behind her explaining everything that the guy is doing. And it turns out it's her fiancé, Paul, who she didn't know actually took time away from his career as a musician to be a 3-card Monte hustler for a while. So he is explaining to her, sort of just out of the blue, this is how you do this, and this is why, and now he's gonna, and now he's gonna cough, and you watched him cough, and he switched the cards, and you're gonna lose. That whole bit at the end with Lincoln telling Booth that you're always going to lose, and if you win, it's because the man wanted you to win, that is something that she picked up from her fiancé. So she becomes really interested in this game, in this way of relating, in this thing, and again, you can hear in the dialogue her own fascination with it when she says that how deep the game is and that so much of it is wrapped up in the cards. Essentially, this is a play, and again, I'm going to say this is a play about 5 different times, and the answer is always going to be a different thing. This is a play about a lot of things. But among other things, this is a play in which an artist finds out about something in life she had no idea about, becomes really fascinated about, and has to write a play about it in order to get that out of her system, in order to stop having dreams about 3-card Monte, in order to get inside her fiance's head a little more and understand a little more about what he's about, or at least what that part of him is about, etc. Okay, so that's just a little piece of trivia, but to give you a little more instruction about what it's about. And by the way, she also says that the opening stage directions of the play that describe his apartment, or the Lincoln and Booth's apartment, are a description of Paul Osher's apartment when she met him. Okay, which is a transition. So let's get the play out and read the opening stage directions. So a new volunteer. This is, by the way, if you don't want to answer a question or make a comment later, here's a really short thing that you could read. So volunteer to read the very first thing in the play. It says scene 1, and there's a block of stage directions. So volunteer to read that.
I'll do it.
Yes, please.
Thursday evening, a seedily furnished rooming house room. A bed, a reclining chair, a small wooden chair, some other stuff, but not much else. Booth, a black man in his early 30s, practices 3-card Monte scam on a classic setup. 3 cards, a cardboard playing board atop 2 mismatched milk crates. His moves and accompanying patter are, for the most part, studied and awkward.
Okay. This is what we would call, in the theater, realism. Just a brief digression on realism. Realism is a theatrical style that is all about showing you the world as it looks every day. I always use the phrase accumulation of surface detail, okay, to describe realism. Accumulation of surface detail means that we have all these little details about the way that people speak, or the way that people dress, or the way that people behave, or the way that an environment plays out, and we simply try to replicate the world as it seems to us on the stage, okay? That's realism. I mention it because this is a play that is partly realistic. Okay, the opening stage directions give us a room that is recognizable. It is a room based on an actual room in the world, Paul Osher's old apartment. Okay? Does that make sense? This is not, however, an entirely realistic play. What in this play is not realism? In other words, what in this play is not a representation of something we would see in the actual world? You know what I'm thinking of, you just don't want to say it. What's something in this play that's not in the world? Somebody has a job in this play that's not in the world.
They wouldn't have somebody at an arcade impersonating Abe Lincoln and shooting.
Right, and if it were, yeah, the idea that he's got this job, that he is a professional Abe Lincoln impersonator, and not just a professional Abe Lincoln impersonator, but a professional Abe Lincoln impersonator in a very circumscribed context. Only the moment of the assassination. And he's black on top of that, which is an unusual choice for casting Abraham Lincoln. And so he performs it in whiteface. Okay? All of this is outside the realm of realism. Okay? We don't really need to read it out loud, but if you flip the page, you can see the opening entrance of Booth. We see that he's dressed in an antique frock coat, wears a top hat and a fake beard, dressed like Abraham Lincoln, etc. So we have something in the play that's from the realm of the metaphorical, that's from the realm of the mythical. And if all that weren't enough, it just so happens, out of possibly coincidence, possibly not, that his first name is Lincoln. And if that weren't enough, his brother's first name is... And now you've all spoken, so I will stop putting pressure on you. Everybody said something. Okay. So, and he's got this brother named Booth. So we are simultaneously 1 foot in the realm of the real, and one foot in the realm of the mythical. In this case, our myth is being drawn from American history. Okay, this key event in the history of the United States, the assassination, by the way, in a theater, you probably all knew that, at Ford's Theater, by the brother of America's most famous actor. You might not know that John Wilkes Booth, his brother was a guy named Edwin Booth, who was the most famous Shakespearean actor of the middle 19th century in the United States. And of course he jumps onto the stage at Ford's Theater, injuring his leg, etc., etc., Sic Semper Tyrannis. This is a known American myth, okay? So we are going to borrow a kind of mythopoetic story and incorporate it into a realistic story, and she's going to simultaneously put on this balancing act. What do I mean by a balancing act? Well, do we explain realistically some of the things that go on in the play that are from the realm of myth? I would say yes. Why are the boys named Lincoln and Booth when they are born?
It's a joke.
Exactly. And by the way, sometimes that's all the explanation you need for us to be like, okay, that was a little weird that they're named Lincoln and Booth, but their dad was a drunk, he had a strange sense of humor, it was a joke. It's a bit of a cruel joke, but that's all we need for the half of the play that is realism to square itself with the half of the play that is myth. It's a coincidence. They're not in control of it. They don't, in other words, need to act like characters from myth just because they are named after characters from American myth. They don't need to, and one of the things that Parks has said in interviews is that in her mind, these guys are not fated to end the play the way they do. It's very important for her when the play is being performed for the last actions of the play, including the, for lack of a better word, the murder, the assassination, for that not to seem like a foregone conclusion. She makes it very clear that the actors have to treat it like something that could go any number of other directions. It could play out any number of other ways as we're moving forward in time until it actually happens. And only then does it become the fulfillment of the myth. Only then does it become the thing that gives a kind of tragic grandeur to the overall play. She believes in free will. This is an interesting thing for someone who has essentially written a tragedy, a mythical tragedy. Usually we associate tragedy with fate. We associate Oedipus with, well, how could it have been any different? I grew up and I killed my father and I slept with my mother because it was fate that decided that. And my parents tried to make it not happen. I tried to make it not happen. And here I am, the king of thieves, and it's happened. She has this idea that people are making themselves into the version of themselves that they ultimately end up being, regardless if their name is Lincoln or Booth. Does that make sense? Okay. So, let's talk a little bit about Lincoln's job. Okay, we've got this really interesting thing. By the way, I have to say this. As I mentioned, our printer was acting weird today. So I had to email this to our student office workers to print it out. And the two student office workers had added a little something to my notes, which is that they are the greatest students that I've ever taught. So Chelsea, for the film, for permanent record, Chelsea and Nicole are the best students I've ever taught. It must be true, it's here in my notes. So I mention that now so I can joke with them about this later. Okay, so Lincoln's job. Lincoln's job is something, as we've said, that even if there were somewhere in the world a mock Lincoln assassination as a carnival event, as bad taste as that would be in, once we add in all the other elements, clearly this is something from a sort of mythopoetic realm. This is something larger than that. We've also established that it is something that is done more than once, and therefore we have our second example of repetition and revision. We have the three-card Monte game, repetition and revision. We now have another thing on the table to discuss, which is repetition and revision as it relates to the assassination. Okay? That is something that is done multiple times, again, First for practice, then for real. Okay? Let's go to the play. All right, so I think I'm on one page in mine. I believe you guys will be on page 54. Okay? Lincoln will have a line starting with, "It's pretty dark," to keep the illusion of the whole thing. Do you have that on your page? Okay. Another brave reader from page 57. I see that you guys have different copies. Do you have this one?
Yeah.
Okay, you're on page 47. Okay, 47. Sadly, Andrew, I don't know what page to
We'll just come with the scene.
The scene is scene 3. 3/4 of the way through scene 3. Okay. It's a very long passage by Lincoln. It starts with, "It's pretty dark." Do you want me to just read it? I think you do. Based on some paint expressions, I'll just. If I had, if I had a male student in the class, I would pick on him right now. But I'll read it. Okay. This is a passage, by the way, that was written in rehearsal. The director, a guy named George C. Wolfe, very famous director in New York City, made a name for himself in the 80s with a play called The Colored Museum, which is also very interesting. So George C. Wolfe and Susan Larry Parks are collaborators, and he and the actors and she all agreed that there needed to be a little more explanation of the job, and so she sat in the back row of the theater, and an hour later wrote, had this monologue. So this is something that was done very, just in quickly. This was not part of the original rehearsal script. Okay. So again, his description. It's pretty dark, to keep the illusion of the whole thing. But on the wall opposite where I sit, there's a little electrical box, like a fuse box, silver metal. It's got a dent in it, like somebody hit it with a fist. Big old dent, so everything reflected in it gets reflected upside down. Like you're looking in a spoon. That's where I can see them, the assassins. Not behind. Now, by the way, what do you make of that image? So he's going to see all the assassins, but he's going to see them upside down. What do you make of that?
I have a thought if I'm allowed to.
Elizabeth, yeah, sure. Elizabeth, what's your thought?
I think of it as like, so you see a reflection of your assassins, but it's a common understanding. Everyone knows the spoon. We've all done it with cereal when we're little. So it's got that common quality, but then again, it's the warped version of the assassin. So it's got that dichotomy of the, like you were saying, like
Yeah, we're seeing what's behind us in a distorted fashion.
Right.
This is a play in which people are essentially threatened by their own history. They're essentially threatened by what they thought they've left behind them. And what they've left behind them is distorted. Okay? Excellent. All right, let's continue. Where did I stop? Not behind me yet, but I can hear him coming. Coming in with his gun in hand, the gun he already picked up out front when he paid his fare. Coming on in. But not behind me yet. His dress shoes making too much noise on the carpet. The carpet's too thin. Boss should get a new one, but he's cheap. Not behind me yet. Not behind me yet. Keep in mind that we also have small-scale repetition and revision going on. Okay, there's a kind of lulling quality to this. If I were a better actor, I would have you all mesmerized by this. I sadly am not. Okay. Not behind me yet. Not behind me yet. Cheap light bulb just above my head. And there he is, standing behind me, standing in position, standing upside down. There's some feet shapes on the floor, so he knows just where he ought to stand, so he won't miss. The gun is always cold. Winter or summer, the gun is always cold. And when the gun touches me, he can feel I'm warm, and he knows I'm alive. And if I'm alive, then he can shoot me dead. Dwell on those couple of lines for a second. What do you make of that? When the gun touches me, he can feel that I'm warm, and he knows that I'm alive, and if I'm alive, then he can shoot me dead. Go ahead. What?
Well, like we were saying earlier, like how even though they're actors, they're put in a position to where
Exactly.
It's like the guy, you know, he was paid his money to go do something at a carnival, but at the same time, he's like living through it. And the fact that he's there holding it can give him an opportunity to shoot him dead, which isn't actually going to happen, but it's probably having the same sort of feeling, like the power exchange.
That's exactly it. This is a performance. Okay? Top Dog Underdog is a performance. Within this performance, we have the description of another performance. A performance that, by the telling of it, also becomes real. Does that make sense? If we make Lincoln's job real, if we make his description of it real, then we make the act of telling about his his job real. And in a sense, we go exactly back to Susan Lloyd Parks' idea of how a play can not necessarily totally be history, but how it can at least partly function the way history functions, as something that has the weight of that which occurs, of that which happens in the world, of that which seriously needs to be considered. Does that make sense? And this play, I can't stress, I mean, this won the Pulitzer Prize in 2002. This was done by every regional theater in the United States. And if not the regional theaters, in some theater in every major American city has done this play. This has been done in Houston, this has been done everywhere. Every time that this play gets done, and every time a group of people in the room feel, again, like I said, if I were a better actor, I could make you feel the cold gun touch right behind your ear, in a way that for a moment makes it not only real in that experience, but the person telling you that becomes a real person. Okay? This is the kind of weight of the conversation. All right, so I'll continue. He knows I'm alive, and if I'm alive, then he can shoot me dead. And for a minute, with him hanging back there behind me, it's real. Me looking at him upside down, and him looking at me looking like Lincoln. Then he shoots. I slump down and close my eyes. And he goes out the other way. More come in, a whole day full. Bunches of kids, little good-for-nothings in their school uniforms. Businessmen smelling like 2-for-1 martinis. Tourists in their theme park t-shirts trying to catch it on film. Housewives with their mouths closed tight, shooting more than once. That's another interesting one. Right? We imagine 2 hands on the gun, closed, and firing until the clip is empty. There may be a kind of truth that she's finding in that as well. They all get so into it. I do my best for them. And now they talk about replacing me with a wax dummy. It'll cut costs. Okay. What do we have to say about that?
Then it won't be real with the dummy.
Yeah, what happens when we replace them with a dummy? They lose the reality. They lose the reality. There's something in taking the human being out of the equation. Now look at what she's done. She has taken something that is a really strange thing for us to get behind. The idea of a black guy dressed up as Abraham Lincoln getting shot over and over again in an arcade, which seems not only strange, but a little bit disgusting. She has made it so that we want to make sure, emotionally, that never goes away. Isn't that strange? Isn't that strange the way drama works on us like that? Something that we might feel incredibly put off by as a conceit at the beginning of the play, now we want to defend it in our mind. Well, it'd be terrible if he was replaced by a dummy. The humanity out of this inhumane thing would disappear. Now we've really got something to chew over. Now we've got a moral conundrum. Now we've got a question about how we really feel about this thing that she's asking us to feel about, to think about. Does that make sense? How has she led us to this? Well, I would go back to repetition and revision. If all of this were a one-act play, if all of this were very short, if we dwelled on things not as long, it would zip by and we might simply say, well, that was a very strange play. What did you think? I thought it was a very strange play. I had very little to say about it. I want to go home and watch TV. Does that make sense? That, by the way, is one of the strangest things about the American theater, is that if a play gets up around, just as a side note, if a play gets up around 2 hours, people desperately start to want to leave. 2 hours is the magic thing. What do they want to leave to do? They want to go home and watch television. It's amazing. Why do they want to? Why do they want to do that? Because television demands less of you. And this is not like a high horse theater thing. It is the difference between being privately home in your in your living room, watching something that you can pause or walk away. You can't do that. It's the communal aspect that's the trick here. We're not as good at being in public as we think we are. It's just a side thought. We are often telling ourselves, and we talk about this all the time, that what's disappearing in the world is privacy. We have, protect my privacy. If we can really rally around the idea of preserving our privacy, what we're actually losing more of is truly public gatherings, truly public spaces, places where everybody has to behave in a way that doesn't alienate any member of the public from joining in. That's part of what being on your best behavior is. There's actually something intensely democratic about that. Part of being on your best behavior is about not swinging your arms around in such a way that people don't want to be in the same room with you. Does that make sense? We are actually in a time when a truly public space, a truly public gathering, where everybody is democratically equally invited and not disinvited by any overt or sort of beneath the surface blocks to access, that's a lot less common than our privacy. Does that make sense? Think about how private you really are in driving around in your car. Think about how private you really are in your home compared to how public you would have to be that public to really reach the extreme other end of the spectrum. Does that make sense? That's not what she's getting at. I was just thinking about that earlier today. So anyway, we all still with the play? Okay. So let's now I have to turn it over to a pair of readers because we're going to have dialogue. And by the way, profanity alert. So if you don't like to say profanity out loud, don't raise your hand. But now I need a Lincoln in a booth to continue reading from where we stopped. So volunteer to read Lincoln. Nobody's going to judge you. Okay, Lincoln in booth. Okay, all right. So we're going to start with Booth. You just got to show your boss.
Okay. You just gotta show your boss that you can do things a wax dummy can't do. You too dry with it. You gotta add spicy shit.
Like what?
Like when they shoot you, I don't know, scream or something.
Scream?
Booth, I'll read the stage directions. Okay. Booth plays the killer without using his gun.
Try it. I'll be the killer. Bang.
Ah.
That's good.
Wax dummy can scream. They can put a voice box in it and make it sound like it's screaming.
You can curse. Try it. Bang.
We're all adults here. We've heard these words before.
That's good, man.
They ain't going for that, though.
You practice rolling and wiggling on the floor?
A little.
Let me see. Bang.
Lincoln slumps down, falls on the floor, and silently wiggles around.
You look more like a worm on the sidewalk. Move your arms. Good. Now scream or something.
Ah.
A little tougher than that. You sound like you're fucking. Hold your head.
A little tougher than that. Come on. There you go. All right.
Hold your head or something. Where I shot you. Good. And look at me. I am the assassin. I am Booth. Come on, man. This is live and dead. Go all out.
One of the greatest stage directions in the history of drama. Simply, Lincoln goes all out. You don't need to go all out, it's fine, but there is when you perform it, it would be a mess. It would be, he would be screaming and thrashing, and so he would go all out. Okay. Continue?
Cool, man, that's cool. That's enough.
What do you think?
I don't know, man. Something about it. I don't know. It was looking too real or something.
God damn you. I don't want it to look too real. I'd scare customers. They'd be scared for... I'd be out for sure. You're trying to get me fired.
I'm trying to help you. Cross my heart.
People are funny about their Lincoln shit. It's historical. People like the historical shit in a certain way. They like it to unfold, and they fold it up neatly like a book. Not raggedy and bloody and screaming. You trying to get me fired. I'm a brother playing Lincoln. It's stretch for someone's imagination. It ain't easy for me either. Every day I put on that shit, I leave my own shit at the door, and I put on that shit, and I go out there and I make it work. I make it look easy, but it's hard. That shit is hard, but it works, because I work it. And you're trying to get me fired. You swore off them cards.
I swore off.
Oh, I swore off them cards, sorry. Took nowhere jobs, drank, then Cookie threw me out. What the fuck was I gonna do? I seen that help wanted sign, and I went up in there, and I looked good in the get up and agreed to the white face, and they really dug it, and that me and Abe got the same, and Honest Abe got the same name. It's a sit-down job with benefits. I don't want to get fired. They don't want to give me a good reference if I get fired.
Okay, we'll stop there. Thank you both. That was a lot to read, I realize. But what I want to call attention to is how we could actually substitute the word historical for personal in this last passage and have it ring just as true. Because I think what she's doing is drawing a connection between the realm, remember the realm of the myth, this big American myth, this story that we all know of the Lincoln assassination, that we as a country drag around with us, to a kind of personal set of background issues, of memories, of damage that we drag around with us on a personal level. Okay, so what if we were to say, people are funny about they personal shit. It's personal. People like they personal shit a certain way. This is essentially the transition that we're going to make. We're going to go from, as someone who thinks about history, I need the world of history to be wrapped up in a tight little package so I can deal with it. But I also need my own personal history to be wrapped up in a knowable, tight little package so I can deal with it. Does that make sense? Anything else you want to say about that? Does that brush against what you're doing in the larger scheme of this class? How so? How so?
Probably what people think about chronic diseases, I don't know, in academia or in the medical field or something like that, versus what people think about it in their personal lives and the way they apply that kind of knowledge to their personal lives.
What is it supposed to be versus what is it?
Yeah.
What is it supposed to be to the world versus what is it to me?
Yes.
Does that make sense? I hope that works, because I haven't been here for the rest of the class. I hope that works. You tell me if that works. Okay. So, moving along. Okay, so please go to page 70. Now we're going to move directly into a discussion of family issues. It'll be your page 66. Andrew, let me find the scene. Scene 5, more or less kind of, I don't know, 40% of the way in. So there's a line, Lincoln has been talking, and the passage starts with a dash, a period, and then just spent it. Okay? We're going to go down the page a little bit. We're not going to read all that. We're just going to go to why you think they left us, man. Okay? Does that make sense? Okay. So you all have that? Why you think they left us, man? Okay. New Lincoln, new Booth. By the way, we're 15 minutes from the end. Okay, new Lincoln. Oh, new Booth. Oh, okay, you have a preference. Okay, new Booth and new Lincoln.
I'll do Lincoln.
Okay.
I'm right next.
Okay. Oh, and you guys can have a lot of energy and a lot. Okay. All right. Okay. So we'll start. Now we're on a discussion of family. So why do you think they left us, man?
Alright, why do you think they left us, man?
Mom and Pops, I don't think about it too much.
I don't think they liked us.
No, that not it.
I think there was something out there that they liked more than they liked us, and for years they were struggling against moving towards that more like something. Each of them had a special something that they were struggling against. Mom had hers, Pops had his, and they were struggling. We moved out of that nasty apartment into a house, a whole house. They weren't perfect, but it was a house, and they bought it, and they brought us there, and everything we owned. Figuring we could be a family in the house, and then things, then two separate things each of them was struggling against would just leave them be. Then things would see the house and be impressed, and then just leave them be. We would see the job Pops had, and how he shined his shoes every night before he went to bed. Shine them shoes whether they needed it or not. And the thing he was struggling against would see all that, and it would just let him be. And the thing Mom was struggling against, It would see the food on the table every night and listen to her voice when she'd read us sometimes. The clean clothes, the buttons sewed on all right, and it would just leave her be. Just let us all be, just regular people living in a house. That weren't too much to ask.
So let's pause there. This is a really, I think, a very interesting and kind of beautiful passage. What's Lincoln saying?
That if they could just get to that perfect idea of house and family, that like him being an alcoholic wouldn't chase him there.
Yeah, I mean, she's using a metaphor here to describe something that's very real in people's lives. That the thing, and again, she's sort of anthropomorphizing these things, giving these, giving these people's issues, giving this, whatever it is that makes them screwed up, giving it a kind of like exterior reality, almost like it has a personality, almost like you can reason with it. And these things, whatever these things are, that their unhappiness is, wherever their pain is coming from, that now that they've got this house, and now that he's got this job, and now that she makes the world the way that she wants it to be in the house, that their issues will walk up like their issues were people that, like they owed him money, or they were there to collect some debt. And they would see the house, and they would see the meals on the table, and they would see him taking care, shining his shoes and going to work, and they would say, you know what? Those people, we'll give them a pass. And that was their fantasy. And it didn't work, but the fantasy is a really powerful, persuasive fantasy. Does that make sense? I mean, this should land on you like poetry. I mean, this is, or literature, something. I think there was something out there that they liked more than they liked us. What a way to start a speech, for one thing. For two adult children who had been abandoned by their parents when they were 16 and 13, and that's when they were abandoned by their father. 2 years younger than that, they were abandoned by their mother. So again, for two adult children to have this conversation and say, I think there was something out there that they liked more than they liked us, and for years they were struggling against moving towards that more liked something. And again, this idea that they would put up this version of life that whatever was out there stalking them would see and would give them a pass because of it is a very powerful image, because it explains, I think, in a really indirect way, which is usually the way art manages to be effective. It's not to explain something literally, but to come at it sideways. That's why we like art, because it surprises us that it makes sense of something to us. Through a metaphor, through an indirection, I thought I was going to think about this, but now I'm thinking about this. It gets to that place that so many people are building something to defend themselves from something that really they can't be defended from. Okay? Let's continue, guys. You're reading this nicely. So we'll pick it up from right after we stopped.
Okay. Lizzie was grown when they split.
16 and 11 ain't grown.
16 grown.
Oh, it's 16 and 11 in your script?
Mm-hmm.
That's, yes.
Rewrite from this one. That's interesting. Okay. Okay. Yeah, we've got 16 and 13 in ours. Yeah, okay.
And a few other things.
And a few other things. Yeah, I've been letting those slide. Okay, continue if you would. I'm sorry to interrupt.
Okay, 16 grown, almost. And it was okay because she was there. Shit man, it ended like they both one day both together packed all their shit up and left us so they could have fun in the sun on some tropical island, and you and me would have to grab the dirt forever. They didn't live together. That makes it different. She left. 2 years go by, then he left. Like neither of them couldn't handle it no more. She split, then he split. Like the whole family, mortgage, bills, going to work thing was just too much. And I don't blame them. You don't see me holding down the steady job, cause it's bullshit, and I know it. I seen how it cracked them up, and I am going there.
Okay, let's pause there. What's he saying? What's the gist of what he's saying?
Can't really blame them for it.
You can't blame who?
The parents, like, he's just like they couldn't handle it given the situation, and
Mhm.
he's relating it to how they can't handle it too.
Yeah,
He can't
yeah.
have his job, he's
Essentially-
his cards.
Yeah, essentially, we're back to the historical and the personal function in weirdly similar ways. There's the version of events that we want to be true. There's the version of events that are ostensibly true. And much of life is about the tension between those two things. Okay? Let's continue a little bit longer.
It ain't right. Me trying to make myself into one woman, man just cause response me like that. One woman, rubber, wearing my not me. She gonna walk in here looking all hot and shit, trying to see how much she can get me to spend, how much she can get me to give her before she gives me my shit.
And thank you, lovely reader people. Yes, I know when you came to class today, that's not what you thought you would be reading. So anyway, but anyway, this idea, he makes this transition, and now he gets into an even more interesting place, which is not necessarily about his family, but it's about his love and sexual relationships with women. It ain't right me trying to make myself into a one-woman man just because she wants me like that. I mean, this is now how sort of a personal sense of betrayal on one front is going to turn around and express itself as negativity in a totally different part of his life. Okay? One woman rubber wearing motherfucker? Shit, not me. She's gonna walk in here looking all hot and shit, trying to see how much she can get me to sweat, how much she can get me to give her before she gives me mine's shit. That is a really interesting sort of transposition of the idea. Thoughts? Do we blame things on the wrong place? Do you see in your work people blaming stuff on the wrong thing? Somebody pipe in. A lot of you are nodding, but somebody must have an actual example.
Well, I used to work in death investigation, and you know, you go through the grief process, and when I'd be like having to tell someone that their loved one died, all of a sudden it'd be my fault, or I'd get blamed, or I'd get called a bitch, or white bitch, or white devil, or something like that, depending on the culture I was dealing with, or something like that, and they would take all their grief and all this misunderstanding that they had of what the situation that was going on, and they would immediately, it was my fault, I was the angel of death, it was my fault that loved one was dead.
How did you deal with that?
Well, one, I'm not there anymore.
Okay.
But you can't really do anything about it. You can't react because the loved one died. It's a grief process. You just have to take it.
Yeah.
You have to kind of just absorb what's going on and then try and be the informer and not this evil perception that they have of you now.
Anybody want to add to that? Anybody else have any comparable experience?
Well, I don't have an experience, but we've been talking about how some diseases people automatically, some of their genes might predisposition them for it. But then they just automatically say, well, it's the genes, not their diet or their exercise. I mean, so that, they're just blaming it on that part, not their other actions.
Right. What do we do with that? If that is so intrinsic to human beings, what do we do with that? What do we do with that, Professor? What do we do with that, Professor? Professors, plural,
I have
either.
the answer here. That's why I teach, to get the answers from the students.
Do you know?
Health education.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. All right. Let's keep reading just a little bit more. I'm going to move us now to page 104 in the script that most of you have. It is page. Yeah, maybe I'll just read this one. I'll take a mercy on you. Page 99 in the version I've got, and Andrew, we're in the final scene. It's Booth has a very long passage that begins with, you know, she was putting her stuff in plastic bags.
Yeah.
Okay. So we're all together? All right. So I'm just going to go ahead and read it. You know, she was putting her stuff in plastic bags. She was just putting her stuff in plastic bags. Not putting, but shoving. She was shoving her stuff in plastic bags. Again, repetition and revision on a small scale. He's revising his story. He's telling his story slightly differently. He's repeating the idea, but changing it a little bit. Not putting, but shoving. She was shoving her stuff in plastic bags, and I was standing in the doorway watching her. And she was so busy shoving the shit she didn't see me. I ain't made of money. That's what he was always saying, the guy she had on the side. I would catch them together sometimes. The first time I cut school, I got tired of hanging out, so I goes home, figured I could tell Mom I was sick and cover my ass, come in the house real slow because I'm sick, and I'm moving slow and quiet. By the way, you didn't think I was going to find the one thing in the play that had something to do, even tangentially, with disease, even if it's faked. But we did. Okay, so there's something here. I'm sick, I'm moving slow and quiet. He had her bent over. I mean, everything about this is kind of sick in its metaphorical way, though. They both had all-day clothes on, like they was about to do something, like go out dancing, because they was dressed to the nines. But at the last minute, his pants had fallen down, and her dress had flown up, and they'd ended up doing something else. They didn't see me come in. They didn't see me watching them. They didn't see me going out. That was a Thursday. Somebody told me to cut school, something told me to cut school the next Thursday, and sure enough, he was her Thursday man, every Thursday, yeah. Thursday nights, she was always all cleaned up and fresh and smelling nice, serving up dinner. And Pops would grab her, because she was all bright, and she would look at me, and like she didn't know that I knew, but she was asking me not to tell know-how. She was asking me to, oh, who knows. She was talking with him one day, her side man, her Thursday dude, her backdoor man. She needed some money for something. There'd be some kind of problem, some kind of mistake that had been made, some kind of mistake that needed cleaning up, and she was asking Mr. Thursday for some money to take care of it. I ain't made of money, he says. Again, a repetition. He was putting his foot down. And then there she was, 2 months later, not showing yet. Maybe she got rid of it. Maybe she hadn't. Maybe she stuffed it along with all of her other things in them plastic bags while he waited outside in the car with the motor running. She must have known I was going to walk in on her this time because she had my payoff, my inheritance. She had it all ready for me, $500 in a nylon stocking. Huh. What do you make of that? In the larger context of the play, we're near the end of the play, so we've got to consider what's gone before now to make heads or tails of it. What's this deal with the inheritance? Please.
Well,
You didn't know you were raising your hand, but you were. Okay, all right.
Well, their parents gave them $500 apiece when they
Separately,
left separately.
yeah.
You know, the father gave it to Lincoln and mother gave it to Booth. And I don't know. I guess I'm still thinking about it while I didn't really have a comment ready to go.
Well, the mom gave it to Booth because she knew that he knew
Yeah.
that she was cheating, and Lincoln, the dad gave it to Lincoln because he knew that Lincoln knew that he was cheating.
Yeah.
That was their way of saying sorry.
Yeah. Is it a bribe? Is it really? If it's an inheritance, it's an unusual kind of inheritance. Again, as we learned from her essay, one of the things Ms. Parks likes to do is take a concept that we think we know, like history or performance or inheritance, and try and play around with that word. Play around with the context in which we receive that word to make it mean something different. So what really is their inheritance? Is it just $500?
It's dysfunction.
Okay.
It's like family dysfunction, life dysfunction. They inherited their dysfunctional ways, I guess, from their parents.
Okay. So what are they doing by talking through this?
Trying to justify their actions.
Okay. Which we do all the time. I mean, is that not what human beings do? Okay, so we're looking for a justification. I would say even calling it an inheritance, when we went straight to it's a bribe, it's an apology, it's a lot of things. It's not, it might be an inheritance, but it's not just an inheritance. Okay? It's a curse. I mean, where does the play go from here? We only have a few pages left in the play, 9, 10 pages. How's the play end? Where do we go from here?
They put down their inheritance.
Yeah.
Get all of it.
They wager the inheritance on the 3-card money game. From there, what happens? From there, what happens? Yeah, we play it for real. We play it for real for the last time. We figure out what their real inheritance actually is, which is they don't know how to have a family, which is they don't know how to be men in the world. They don't know how to be brothers. That's when they're fighting over their inheritance. They're fighting over more than $500. When she describes them in the last moments of this play as no longer Lincoln and Booth but two male animals, she's getting at something about the characters that she made that's truthful to this play. What do you think about that? What is it? Better way to ask that question. What does it make you think of?
Survival of the fittest.
Okay.
And they're fighting over who gets to live, who gets it all.
Let me ask you
Who's gonna be
this.
the king of the world.
That's a great take on it. I've never asked this follow-up question because nobody's ever said that before, but it's interesting. Does the fittest survive in this play?
I don't think there is a fittest.
Okay.
I think they're both survival.
That's the game they think they're playing, but that's not.
That's what
Yeah.
they're doing. They think
Okay.
it's survival of the fittest, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the fittest person won.
Okay.
I think that depends on the viewer.
Okay. Good. Good. Other thoughts?
It's like a play with on the title, the top dog, underdog.
Yeah.
Because you think of Lincoln as the top dog and Booth as the underdog, but he kind of feels like he's the underdog, but in the end, he comes out as, well, he considers himself as
Yeah.
the top dog.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great. What else?
I see him, like, he already inherited all the problems from his parents.
Mhm.
Now he's, by killing Lincoln and the girlfriend or whatever.
Grace, amazing
Yeah.
Grace.
Yes. Then he's
I say it about 40 times. Yeah.
Inheriting all their problems as well. So I don't really, I mean, he might think he's coming out on top, but I don't see him.
Okay. Did John Wilkes Booth win by assassinating Abraham Lincoln? Yeah, probably, maybe in his mind momentarily, but probably not for real, The personal is the historical, is the personal is the historical, in a kind of endless chain. Okay. That's what I had prepared for today. That's my hour 25-ish. But I'm happy to take sort of continuing thoughts, questions, comments, any responses that people have.
Well,
Anything we didn't talk about.
You started off with a very interesting point about theater,
Mm-hmm.
and that this writes history where history was not in fact written.
Yes.
You didn't say that in the beginning.
I think that that's the gist of what she's arguing.
Okay, if that's the case then, and clearly she's evoking a reality, which doesn't necessarily have to be African American, it could be Chinese American, it could be anything.
Right.
But she set herself the task of writing history, as you say. What is the African American edge here? And I asked the same question too I was talking with David Rainey.
Yeah.
About, In the Blood.
Yeah.
And where do we find that, as opposed to a more generalized, tragic family tragedy, the Greek tragedy,
right.
The problems are reborn
Mm-hmm.
in subsequent generations. Where is the African American?
I'm going to give you an answer that's a bit of a dodge because I'm going to go to what she has said when she was asked that.
Well, that's not a dodge then.
Well, it's a dodge on my part, so I don't have to speak for from a perspective that I don't want to take. The response that she has normally given, when asked, what about, when prefaced with, if this is a black play, what makes this a black play? She normally goes to the idea that it is not inherently, specifically, in terms of the brother storyline, a black play, an African-American play. She is essentially telling the Cain and Abel myth through the Lincoln and Booth story, and in that sense, it's not a racialized myth that she's telling. She is dealing with race, and when pressed, she'll follow this up, there are elements in the play that are specific to an African-American experience. For example, there are moments like the fact that one of the reasons Lincoln has his job is that he is willing to work less than, as they say, literally in the play, than a white guy. That he would, and think about how weird that is. It's back in our realm of, that can only be true in myth, because this is not a real job. This is not, the idea of, well, we got an African-American to play Abraham Lincoln because he worked cheaper than a white guy would work, is an absurdity. Like that's not, so she's playing with something that's not literally true. At the same time, she's playing with something that's literally true. In other words, this is what tragedy is. This is why this is a play as a tragedy. Tragedy is about two things that are simultaneously true, but they're at odds with each other. This is a complex thing, so let me kind of wind this back in. So here's the thing about tragedy. When we're dealing with tragedy, proposition A is true. The play that I was thinking we might talk about in this class was going to be Shakespeare's Othello, for example. Here's something that's, I imagine even if you've never read or seen Othello, you probably have a basic idea what the play's about. Yes, by a kind of a nod that it's okay. Here's the thing that's true in Othello. The thing that's true in Othello is that love makes us better than we normally tend to be. Okay? Othello and Desdemona fall in love, it's a black man and a white woman, and they fall in love, and both of them feel better than they normally tend to be. They both feel like they are improved. I mean, this is our cliche still for thinking about love. You complete me, you make me want to be a better man, and so on and so forth, okay? Love, falling in love, new love, fresh love. It improves us, it makes us better than we normally tend to be. That's true. That's true of human beings, that's true of Othello and Desdemona. Here's the other thing that's true. No, it doesn't. We are still exactly the same person, prone to the same mistakes, prone to petty jealousies, etc. And here's the thing about tragedy, as a genre, as a way of viewing the world. This is true. The opposite, the obverse, the contrary is true. And the fact that the contrary is true, here's the real trick, does not make the first thing untrue. Does that make sense? Both things have to be true at the same time, because that's what it's like to be a human being. That's the thing that tragedy knows about it being a human being. That tells us about what it is to be a human being. It tells us that, yes, this is true for you, and this is true for you, and they don't agree, and they'll never agree, and we're always better than we are, and we're never any better than we normally are, our crappy, regular self. And both of those are simultaneously true, and the whole point of a tragedy like Othello is in the realm of love to deal with that. Okay? Bring it back to the play and the question Professor Gordon asked. We're going in a slightly different direction, I realize.
It's an interesting point. From what you're saying, you're borrowing on Susan Laurie Parks. She's making it biblical. She's talking about the tragedy. We don't transcend our parents. Mm-hmm. Those scenarios are repeated through Cookie. That's her name, yeah. Who was passed back and forth between the brothers. Right. They did to each other what the parents did to each other. I kind of like the play we just saw together, which we enjoyed, which you all must see. After seeing this, we do hope you see In the Blood.
The myth in that one, by the way, is essentially, she wrote 2 plays in a row, both dealing with the idea of the Scarlet Letter, Nathaniel Hawthorne's Scarlet Letter, but instead of a kind of Puritan concern for virginity, it's more about African American motherhood, specifically women having babies out of wedlock. And interesting little side fact, In the Blood is the one they're doing now. The other play is called Fucking A, on the same theme, was developed originally in Houston with a company here in Houston. So that was, it had its world premiere here. Yeah. But those are her 2 plays on that myth. But anyway, you're saying.
So, and it is so tragic, it is so universal, it's almost, the set design is African American, but the story is humanity, which makes it especially humanizing.
Here's the way I'll answer your question, and to give you a real answer to it. If the play is an African American play, if we're going to say this is not just a universal tragedy, but this is a black tragedy, or this is this is specific to a population, the ways in which that gets decided, that's going to be decided by 2 actors and a director. You said you were talking to David Rainey. David Rainey is a local actor and director who has played, in this play. He's done this play, and so David's going to have an answer to that is not definitive for the play, but it's the way he, as an African American actor, answered that specifically. Yeah. One of the things that I think is important about theater is that theater is always local. theater, I mean, even the Broadway theater is in its weird way local. The play, the script can go anywhere. This is in many people's possession around the country and around the world. But if we're going to make it into history the way she's talking about making it into history, she's not, in the first thing that we read, that passage about a play is something we can take and sort of treat as history because it happens. That only happens, that circuit only completes itself when it gets put into bodies and put into mouths and put on a stage and absorbed by people in the room. So that question about what's true in this play about what it is to be two African American men living in the 21st century, that gets answered by those two guys.
But this is a wonderful play then for an anthropology course or an anthropology perspective, because we're dealing with universal thematics, but all of the accoutrements of it, all of the features of it are through a specific cultural idiom, in which case...
See the play done in Houston, see it done in Los Angeles, see it done in Chicago, and you've got a way of looking at what this play is as something that happens in the world. Yeah.
Right.
And I would think that the actors, you say, depends upon the actors, the way they carry themselves and the
Right.
cadence and all of that would determine what kind of play it is.
Yeah, absolutely. There is. I'll give you an example. One of the things that is, I think, just amazing. Let me give myself a chair. One of the things I think is amazing about the documentary that exists of the first performance of the play at the Public Theater. I'm going to take my glasses off so I don't fall, or so they don't fall rather. So I don't fall. Which is about what I'm going to do. Jeffrey Wright, the actor who played Lincoln, during the multiple, the scene that we read aloud with practicing bang, fall on the floor, bang, fall on the floor, he had this gesture that he repeated. Again, it's repetition and revision over and over again, where he had himself kind of like this, and he's got the top hat on, remember, and so he would kind of move his hand over his head as part of his fall in such a way to knock the hat off, but also to guide it. I mean, there's also a practical element that it's not a big set. It's a thrust stage, which means audience on three sides, kind of like us now. If he just went, and the hat would end up, at your feet in the front row. So it's partly that, but it's also partly a very elegant gesture of sort of tumbling down. And so the way he made that work, boom, and practice it again, bang, over and over again. The repetition and revision is specific to his body as he's doing it, and that's also part of how he's making that action mean what it means. Does that make sense?
Sure.
In theater, we're very big on the idea of what we call embodiment, as you would expect us to be, because that's such a big element of what it is to act out a play, is to deal with the specificity that an individual body adds, and the meanings that an individual body adds to a given action. So I'll answer it that way.
I think this has been a terrific time. I'd like to just...
This is fun. Thank you all.
It's wonderful to... Janice and I are having this course to have people such as yourself we can learn from, and you've added so much and it will help us so much throughout the course. Thank you.
I hope it is something that you guys will find relevance in, and maybe it'll give you an example to go back to, or
sure, it's a very significant moment. Thank you.
Cool, and you guys were great. Thanks to everybody who tossed in thoughts and read, and I know that's it's different. It's different than a lot of stuff that I'm sure you've read aloud. So thanks everybody. Oh, if anybody wants it, by the way, because sometimes you have that one thought or that question or what did he mean when he said? I'll just put my email in the board if you want to get hold of me.
Great. Okay, why don't we take a few minute break, get some air, and then we have a lot to talk about. You don't need your glasses.
There's a